There was something I used to notice that most people brushed off immediately, not because it wasn't important, but because they didn't understand it. I remember this clearly. People would suddenly pause and say, "Did you hear that?" A ringing out of nowhere. And then just as quickly, they ignored it, they moved on, they forgot about it. But what I saw was that moments like this were never just about the sound itself. Now listen carefully. Have you ever experienced it? A sudden ringing in your ears, no warning, no obvious reason. It comes and then fades, and you're left wondering, what was that? Now imagine this, you're in the middle of your day. Everything is normal, and suddenly there's a sharp or soft ringing. For a few seconds, everything else fades into the background. Your attention shifts instantly. You become aware. That moment interrupts your normal flow. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. The sound itself is not the most important part. It's what it does to your attention. I saw this again and again. People didn't realize that these sudden moments pulled them out of autopilot, even if just for a second. Now listen carefully. Most of your day runs automatically. You think, you react, you move, without stopping, without noticing. And then something like this happens. And for a brief moment, you become fully aware. Now imagine this, that ringing forces you to pause, to notice, to shift your attention. And then you either ignore it or you become curious. Now here's something very important. People often rush to extreme explanations without understanding simple ones. And because of that, they either become afraid or completely dismissive. Both are mistakes. Now listen carefully. This is not about fear, and it's not about superstition. It's about awareness. Because once you understand what's really happening, you stop reacting blindly. Now imagine this. Instead of asking, "Is something wrong?" you begin asking, "What changed in that moment?" Your focus, your environment, your state, that question changes everything. Now here's the truth. Not every unusual moment has a hidden meaning, but every moment has an effect on your attention, and attention shapes your experience. Now listen carefully. In this message, I'm going to break this down clearly, why these sudden moments happen, what most people misunderstand about them, and how to respond in a way that keeps you aware, calm, and in control without fear, confusion, or overthinking. Now, this is where most people go in the wrong direction because they jump to conclusions before they understand the basics. I remember this clearly. People would feel that sudden ringing and immediately think something extreme, either fear or mystery, but almost no one stopped to ask, what is actually happening in my body right now? Now listen carefully. Your ears are not just for hearing, they are constantly adjusting, balancing pressure, filtering sound, responding to your environment. Most of the time, you don't notice any of it. Now imagine this. A small shift happens inside your ear, a quick change in pressure, a brief signal from your nervous system, and suddenly you hear a ringing, not because something dramatic happened, but because your awareness caught it. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Your body produces signals all the time, but you only notice them when your attention shifts. I saw this again and again. People didn't suddenly start hearing something new. They simply became aware of something that was already happening. Now listen carefully. There's another factor most people ignore: mental state. Now imagine this. You've been thinking constantly. Your mind is busy. Your attention is scattered. Then suddenly, everything pauses for a moment. And you notice a sound you usually ignore. That's not coincidence. That's awareness breaking through the noise. Now, here's something very important. The more distracted you are, the more surprising these moments feel because you're not used to noticing small changes. I saw this clearly. People who trained their awareness stop reacting to these moments with confusion because they understood them. Now, listen carefully. This doesn't mean you should ignore your body. If something is frequent or uncomfortable, you pay attention to it, but you don't jump to conclusions. Now imagine this. Instead of reacting with fear, you observe, you stay calm, you notice what changed. That keeps you in control. Now here's the truth. Understanding removes unnecessary fear, and awareness replaces confusion. Now listen carefully. This is the key shift. You stop asking, what does this mean? And start asking, what is happening right now? Now imagine this. You feel the ringing, but instead of reacting, you observe your breathing, your environment, your state. That moment becomes neutral. Now here's something powerful. When you respond with awareness, you train your mind to stay steady. And when your mind stays steady, nothing small turns into something big. Now listen carefully. This is why understanding matters. It keeps you grounded, focused, in control. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the mistake most people make in these moments, why their reaction creates more confusion than the experience itself. Now, this is where most people lose control, not because of the sound itself, but because of how they react to it. I remember this clearly. Two people could experience the exact same moment, the same sudden ringing, but their reactions were completely different. One stayed calm, the other became anxious. And from that point, everything changed. Now listen carefully. The ringing itself is brief, it comes and it fades. But what most people do next extends the experience in their mind. Now imagine this. You hear the ringing and immediately think, what is that? Then is something wrong? Then why is this happening to me? And just like that, your mind starts building a story. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Your reaction can amplify a small moment into something much bigger. I saw this again and again. People didn't struggle with the sound. They struggled with the meaning they attached to it. Now listen carefully. The moment you label something as strange or dangerous, your attention locks onto it. Now imagine this. Instead of letting it pass, you focus on it more. You listen for it again. You become hyper aware. That creates tension. Now here's something very important. The more you focus on a sensation, the stronger it feels. Not because it changed, but because your attention increased. I saw this clearly. People who fixated on it started noticing it more often, not because it increased, but because they were searching for it. Now listen carefully. This is the mistake, turning a neutral moment into a negative experience. Now imagine this. You hear the ringing, but instead of reacting, you stay calm, you let it pass. You don't chase it with your thoughts. That changes everything. Now here's the truth. Not every sensation needs a reaction. Some just need to be observed and released. Now listen carefully. Your mind is always trying to explain things, but not every moment requires a meaning. Now imagine this. You remove the question, what does this mean? And replace it with, it's happening and it will pass. That creates stability. Now here's something powerful. When you stop reacting automatically, you regain control. I saw this again and again. People who stayed neutral stopped feeling confused, stopped feeling anxious because they didn't build unnecessary stories. Now listen carefully. This is the shift. You stop feeding the moment with your attention. Now imagine this. The ringing happens, but your state stays the same, calm, steady, unmoved. That's control. Now here's the truth. Your experience is shaped more by your reaction than by the event itself. And once you understand that, nothing small can pull you out of your state easily. Now listen carefully. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you exactly what to do instead, how to respond in a way that keeps your mind clear, your attention steady, and your control intact. Now, this is where everything becomes practical, because understanding is not enough. If you don't know how to respond, I remember this clearly. Once people learned what to do in that exact moment, everything changed. Not because the ringing stopped forever, but because their reaction became controlled. Now listen carefully. The next time it happens, you don't panic, you don't overthink, you don't chase it with questions. You follow a simple process. Now imagine this. The ringing starts. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause just for a second. That pause is important because it stops your automatic reaction. Now here's the first step. You stay still, not rigid, not tense, just steady. I saw this clearly. Movement often increases distraction. Stillness increases awareness. Now imagine this. Instead of shifting around or reacting physically, you remain calm. That stabilizes your state. Now here's the second step. You bring your attention to your breathing, not in a complicated way, just noticing it. Now listen carefully. Your breath anchors your attention. It keeps your mind from drifting into unnecessary thoughts. Now imagine this. You feel your breathing slow down. Your mind follows. That creates calm. Now here's the third step. You observe without labeling. This is where most people fail. I saw this again and again. They immediately try to explain it, but explanation creates tension. Now imagine this. You notice the sound, but you don't call it bad or strange. You simply observe it. That keeps your mind neutral. Now here's the fourth step. You let it pass, not by forcing it, but by not holding on to it. Now imagine this. You don't chase the moment. You don't try to control it. You allow it to fade naturally. That creates release. Now here's something very important. This entire process takes only a few seconds, but it changes everything. I saw this clearly. People who responded this way stopped feeling confused, stopped feeling anxious, because they stayed in control. Now listen carefully. This is the difference. Most people react, you respond. Now imagine this. The same moment happens, but your experience is completely different. Calm instead of confused, steady instead of reactive, clear instead of overwhelmed. Now here's the truth. Control is not about stopping the moment. It's about how you handle it. Now listen carefully. When you follow this process consistently, your mind learns something powerful. Not everything needs a reaction. Now imagine this. Small moments no longer pull you out of your state. You stay grounded. You stay aware. You stay in control. That's the result. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you what begins to happen when you apply this consistently, how your awareness increases, and why you start noticing your environment and your own state in a completely different way. Now, this is where things begin to feel different, not because something dramatic happens, but because you begin to change. I remember this clearly. This was the point where people stopped reacting automatically and started noticing more than they ever had before. Now, listen carefully. When you respond with awareness instead of reaction, you train your mind to stay present. And once that starts happening, your perception changes. Now imagine this. You move through your day and you begin to notice small details. Your environment feels clearer. Your thoughts feel slower. Your reactions feel more controlled. That's not coincidence. That's awareness increasing. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. Most people are not lacking control, they are lacking awareness. I saw this again and again. People weren't overwhelmed because life was too much. They were overwhelmed because they weren't present enough to manage it. Now, listen carefully. When your awareness increases, you stop missing what's happening in front of you. Now, imagine this. Before, things would happen quickly and you would react instantly. Now, there's a small gap, a pause, and inside that pause, you have control. Now, here's something very important. That gap changes everything because in that space, you can choose your response. I saw this clearly. People who built this awareness stopped being pulled into every thought, every emotion, every distraction. Now, listen carefully. This is where your internal state begins to stabilize. Now, imagine this. Something unexpected happens, but instead of reacting immediately, you observe first. That creates calm. Now, here's the truth. Calm does not come from controlling everything around you. It comes from controlling how you respond. Now, listen carefully. As your awareness grows, you begin to notice patterns in your thoughts, in your reactions, in your habits. Now, imagine this. You catch yourself before overthinking. You notice when you're getting distracted. You recognize when your attention is drifting. That awareness gives you power. Now, here's something powerful. Once you see a pattern clearly, it becomes easier to change. I saw this again and again. People who became more aware didn't need to force change because they could see what needed to shift. Now, listen carefully. This is the next level. You are no longer just reacting to moments, you are understanding them. Now imagine this. The ringing happens again, but this time it doesn't surprise you, it doesn't confuse you. It simply becomes another moment you observe. That's control. Now here's the truth. When your awareness increases, your reactions decrease. And when your reactions decrease, your clarity increases. Now listen carefully. This is where everything starts to feel lighter, less chaotic, more manageable, more clear. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you what happens next, how this awareness begins to shape your behavior, your decisions, and the way you move through your entire day without even realizing it. Now, this is where the real change becomes visible, not just in what you notice, but in how you act. I remember this clearly. This was the stage where people stopped asking, why did that happen? And started realizing, I'm not reacting the same way anymore. Now, listen carefully. Up until now, you've been building awareness. You've been practicing calm responses. You've been staying present in small moments. And it may have felt simple, but repetition changes behavior. Now imagine this. A situation appears that would normally distract you, but this time you don't follow it. You notice it and let it pass. That's the shift. Now here's the truth you need to understand. What you repeatedly observe without reacting loses its control over you. I saw this again and again. People who stopped reacting instantly started feeling more stable, not because life became easier, but because they stopped feeding every moment with attention. Now listen carefully. This is where your habits begin to change. Now imagine this. Before, you would check something immediately, respond instantly, jump from one thought to another. Now you pause, you choose, you move with intention. That creates discipline. Now here's something very important. Discipline is not about forcing yourself. It's about becoming aware of your actions. I saw this clearly. People who increased their awareness didn't need strict control because they naturally made better choices. Now, listen carefully. This is where your decisions improve. Now, imagine this. You're about to react, but you notice it first. You slow down, you think clearly. That creates better outcomes. Now, here's the truth. Better decisions don't come from more effort, they come from more awareness. Now listen carefully. This is the next shift. You are no longer controlled by impulses. You are aware of them. Now imagine this. A thought appears, but you don't follow it automatically. An emotion rises, but you don't act on it immediately. You observe, then decide. That is control. Now here's something powerful. This change spreads into everything. I saw this again and again. People who developed this level of awareness started improving in areas they didn't expect. Their focus improved, their reactions improved, their consistency improved. Now listen carefully. This is where your entire day starts to feel different. Now imagine this. You move through your day with less chaos, less distraction, less unnecessary thinking, more clarity, more direction, more stability. That creates momentum. Now here's the truth. When your behavior changes at this level, your results begin to change too. Not instantly, but consistently. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the final stage, what it looks like when this awareness becomes part of who you are, and nothing small can easily disturb your state anymore. Now, this is the stage most people never expect to reach because they're used to reacting, used to being pulled, used to losing control over small things. I remember this clearly. This was the moment everything became quiet, not outside, but inside. Now listen carefully. Up until now, small moments could interrupt your state, a sound, a thought, a feeling. And before you knew it, your attention was gone, your focus was broken, your state had shifted. Now imagine this. The same moment happens, but nothing inside you moves. You notice it, but you're not pulled by it. That's the shift. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Control is not about stopping things from happening. It's about not being moved by everything that happens. I saw this again and again. People who built awareness to this level stopped reacting to every small trigger because those triggers lost their power. Now listen carefully. This is where your internal stability becomes strong. Now imagine this. Distractions appear, but they don't take your attention. Thoughts come, but they don't control your direction. Sensations happen, but they don't change your state. That creates calm. Now, here's something very important. At this stage, you don't need to manage yourself constantly because you are already steady. I saw this clearly. People who reached this level stopped feeling overwhelmed by small things because nothing small could pull them out of their center. Now, listen carefully. This is the final shift. You are no longer reacting to moments, you are observing them. Now imagine this. Everything still happens, but your experience is different, quicker, clearer, more controlled. That creates freedom. Now here's the truth. When your mind is not constantly reacting, it has more space, more clarity, more focus. Now listen carefully. This is where peace becomes consistent, not something you chase, not something that comes and goes, but something that stays. Now imagine this. You move through your day without being pulled in every direction. You stay grounded, you stay aware, you stay in control. That's the result. Now here's the truth. Once you reach this level, you don't easily go back because you've trained your mind to respond differently. And that becomes your new normal, not because you forced it, but because you built it. And when you build something this strong, even the smallest moments can no longer disturb your state the way they used to. Now, this is where everything comes down to one thing: not what you heard, not what you understood, but what you do next. I remember this clearly. People would listen to everything, they would agree, they would feel like something clicked, and then they went back to their normal routine and nothing changed. Now, listen carefully. Awareness without action does not create results. Understanding without consistency does not create change. Now imagine this. You know exactly how to respond. You understand the mistake. You've seen the method. But when the moment happens again, you react the same way. Why? Because you didn't decide. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Change begins the moment you choose to apply it. Not later, not tomorrow, but in the next moment it happens. I saw this again and again. People who waited for the right time never built consistency, but those who acted immediately changed quickly. Now listen carefully. This doesn't require anything complicated. It requires a decision. Now imagine this. The next time you notice that sudden ringing, you don't panic, you don't overthink, you don't chase it with questions. You follow the process, you pause, you stay calm, you observe, you let it pass. That moment is where everything changes. Now, here's something very important. Consistency is built in small moments, not big ones. I saw this clearly. People didn't improve because of one big change. They improved because they handled small moments differently, again and again. Now listen carefully. This is the final truth. You don't need to control everything. You need to control how you respond. Now imagine this. Each time the moment appears, you stay steady, you stay aware, you stay in control. And over time, that becomes your default. Now, here's the truth: when your default response changes, your entire experience changes, not because the world is different, but because you are. Now, listen carefully. This is the decision. You either go back to reacting automatically, or you begin responding intentionally. Now imagine this: days pass and you stay consistent, weeks pass and it becomes easier, months pass and it becomes natural. That's how change becomes permanent. Now here's the truth: nothing you heard will matter until you apply it. So the real question is not, was this helpful? The real question is, will you actually use it? Because if you do, something small will start to change something big, and that change will not come from force, but from consistency. And once that consistency builds, you won't go back to the way you were before, because you didn't just learn something, you became someone who responds differently, and that changes everything. Now, this is the part most people don't want to hear, because it's simple, but it's uncomfortable. I remember this clearly. People would reach this point. They would understand everything. They would even feel ready to change. But then they made one mistake, and that mistake kept them exactly where they were. Now listen carefully. They treated this like information instead of a practice. Now imagine this. You've just heard everything. You know how to respond. You understand the process. But instead of applying it, you move on, you scroll, you forget. And when the moment happens again, you react the same way. That's how change disappears. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Your mind returns to what is familiar, not what is correct. I saw this again and again. People didn't fail because they didn't know. They failed because they didn't repeat. Now listen carefully. If you don't practice this, your old reactions will take over automatically. Now imagine this. The ringing happens again, but this time you forget everything you learned. You react, you overthink, you lose control, and just like that, you're back in the same cycle. Now, here's something very important: awareness fades without reinforcement. I saw this clearly. People who didn't revisit this didn't maintain it, because consistency builds strength and inconsistency breaks it. Now listen carefully. This is the warning. Don't let this become another moment you ignore. Now imagine this. Instead of hearing it once, you apply it again and again. You remind yourself, you stay aware. You build the habit that creates change. Now here's the truth: small actions repeated consistently become automatic behavior, and automatic behavior becomes identity. Now listen carefully. This is where everything locks in, not when you understand it, but when you live it. Now imagine this. Days go by and you don't forget. Weeks go by and you don't stop. Months go by and it becomes part of you. That's how something small becomes permanent. Now, here's the truth: you don't need more information, you need more application. Now, listen carefully. This is the final warning. If you ignore this, nothing changes. But if you apply this, even in the smallest moments, everything begins to shift. Now, imagine this: you don't wait, you don't delay, you don't forget. You use it again and again and again. That's how you break the cycle. That's how you build control. That's how you become steady. Now, here's the truth: the moment itself is not important, your response is. And once your response changes, your experience changes with it. And that is what separates people who stay the same from those who actually transform. Now we reach the end, but this is not really an ending. It's a return to something simple that most people overlook. I remember this clearly. After everything was explained, after all the steps, after all the awareness training, people still asked, but what is the real point of all this? And the answer was never complicated. Now listen carefully. This was never about the ringing